Well, I'm Weissenbacher. I'm ABD, working on my dissertation, trying to write and raise a brand new little boy. Actually, he's 1.5 now. My wife was overjoyed to hear that we would not be having a multiple birth because she was afraid with my neuroscientific research that I would use them as subjects. And if we had a multiple birth, I would have a control group. But since we just have one, I cannot experiment on my children. And be scientific. I call my work the born-again brain. And what inspires my work is before I came here, I worked 6 years as a counselor at a drug and alcohol rehabilitation facility. And this facility was a working farm. And so basically we'd take homeless addicts. So we specialize in the homeless addict population. Take them out of the inner city, put them to work on a farm where they would live and work for 1 to 2 years. They would receive job training, counseling, spiritual formation. We would have chaplains and counselors there, and even an education if they needed it. And then job placement upon graduation, at no cost to them. And to start with a story, that it was a graduation day of one of our clients, we'll call him John, and he was, on graduation, the person comes and gives a speech about, and try to inspire the people who are currently in the program, and then head off into bigger and better things. And so John gets up for his graduation speech, all the other clients are there, his church family has come to see his graduation. He stands up and says, "Only chumps work when there's Social Security. Crack and Jack Daniels are calling me in the streets of Vegas. I'm out of here. See ya." He leaves, gets into the vehicle that someone gifted to him for graduation, and drives off. To the stunned silence of everyone else who's there. Because this was a model resident who mentored other residents and exhibited all the signs of a real on-fire spirituality that was truly transformative. And it just made me think, I don't know the difference that makes the difference with this group. I can never predict who's going to make it and who is not, almost at any stage of the program. And here I am counseling these people. And so it just inspires me. These people coming in with damaged brains into a program with spiritual component. Is there ways we can be doing things better and understanding how neuroscience is working with the spirituality and the counseling and all this other stuff? So I've come here to research that. I call this the born-again brain. The basics of my program is I'm looking at both the gradual and instantaneous elements within Wesleyan doctrines of salvation. I can thank Mary for already giving a background to Methodism and John Wesley. And Wesley has the spiritual formation of Wesley was both instantaneous and gradual. There's a gradual formation, but there's instantaneous moments where there's a realization. There's a little work out there on Wesleyan doctrines of salvation and neuroscience that basically say the brain takes a long period to change, to consolidate, to initiate and consolidate change, and so the instantaneous is not possible. Wesleyan doctrine needs to be reformatted and the instantaneous needs to be jettisoned because brains do not work that way. And so part of my dissertation is to say, if we look at neuroscience, it can accommodate both the instantaneous and the gradual. Sorry, writers out there, you got your neuroscience wrong. And so I'm combining chaotic dynamics and neuroscience, looking at different ways the brain could evidence instantaneous change. Primarily, it need not be this gigantic reorganization of everything. You could have a small change that can be amplified to the system. But so the instantaneous is possible. We need the gradual, looking at the neuroscience of moral formation, the gradual aspect, and then bringing in a lot of the neuroscience of automaticity, how you make habits and break habits. That's really key to my formal counseling work. And bringing this all into dialogue with Wesleyanism. Also, in terms of sources, using educational psychology on learning dynamics, drawing in also using models of the dialectic self in terms of formation, dialogue with self, others, and God. Bringing in some psychology. As my colleagues have done, they pick a particular dual aspect monism. My position is to try to sidestep that in dialogue entirely. And just say, if your view on the mind and body can accommodate a holistic anthropology, go with what works, as long as it's not reductionistic, and call it good. I also take a position that a lot of the mind-body philosophy, some are epistemic positions describing how the brain functions, and others are ontological, describing what the mind and brain are. If you break that distinction, there's a lot less conflict between some positions. So I say, pick something, go with it. So I don't want to, I believe you can arrive at my same conclusions. I don't want a bunch of people to disregard my conclusions because I unnecessarily wed my document to a particular philosophy. So that's my foundation. Just looking at neuroscience, and it accommodates the instantaneous and gradual and Wesleyan salvation. But what I really want to do is move on to what I see as more the practical application. I'm taking a step back, translating some of the neuroscience into subjective language of experience, and then using that to talk to churches or counseling programs on ways to improve what they do. That's my eventual goal. I want to use this to improve church practice, teaching, preaching, counseling, and the like. Looking at moral formation and neural connections. Those are some presentations. The practical neuroscience from the pews I did with Mary. And these are some places that I've already have these ideas delivered. First principle, and these can sound like pop neuroscience and pop psychology, which is a risk you run when you're talking to the average layperson. A common phrase is neurons that fire together, wire together. Two different thoughts, they co-occur, they can become linked in the brain. That would be the foundation of triggers in addiction. You walk by a certain person, place, or thing, and it triggers your craving. That's because those two neural areas in the brain become wired together. The interesting part is some of those who've heard me present before, there's a riddle that I faced in my old job where we had a certain group of clients that every 2 weeks would experience a craving like clockwork. On a certain day, certain time, 10% of our population, bam, craving. Could count on it. And I was real puzzled, what is going on? And we eventually figured it out that this group of addicts were the ones that had held a job while they were addicted. And they got paid every 2 weeks. And so even though they had been on the farm for 6 months to a year without receiving a paycheck, on a completely different time clock, their internal time clock had wired to their cravings and the idea of payday, so that when they would normally have received their check and gone out and bought drugs, their craving would hit. And that's the neurons that fire together, wire together. And even so many months later, it was still having a physiological and psychological effect on this group of clients. There's also the idea of use it or lose it. If you deliberately neglect certain neural pathways, you lose some of the function of it. That would be my criticism of Alcoholics Anonymous as rehabilitation therapy. A lot of it is very helpful, but there's a part of it that focuses and tells so many stories about, I used to be an addict, I am an addict, that they don't distance themselves enough with thinking in addictive terms to, I think, fully make a break in some of these neural connections between thoughts and addiction. If you're constantly thinking, I'm an alcoholic, I abuse alcohol, the alcoholic neurons in there are going to be still thinking about this stuff. Better to replace it and think of, what kind of volunteer work should I do today? So it just brings up the question, how do we replace, strengthen, inhibit, and encourage the formation of new neural pathways? And that's where I bring a lot of educational theory in. Another practical application would be pastoral counseling. The idea of the neurons that fire together, wire together. Say memories of trauma are linked to traumatic emotions, but if you're able to tell and retell your stories of trauma in a safe atmosphere, you can de-link the traumatic emotion that's been there. And and begin to link it to safer context memories, so the pain loses its sting. You can see this at a subjective level. The more you tell a story, you're able to tell it easier. Or forgiveness. I would say that, well, anger is a natural response to being hurt. But if you repeatedly think about that person in anger who hurt you, anger becomes hardwired with your thoughts of that person. And so you think of that person, anger comes up. But even after you make a conscious, rational idea that I'm going to forgive this person, the anger thought is still linked. And that delinking must take time. And it counts for an area of forgiveness to tell someone,
It is now 8:30 p.m. Circulation will close at 15:45
is that thinking that if you have said you forgave, but they think, but I'm always so angry, did I ever really forgive? At this point, you're dealing with biology. And let's talk about steps of delinking. Or the dark night of the soul, thinking of that in categories, that maybe the dark night is the brain catching up for the next phase of growth. Let's consolidate the growth that's already occurred and prepare for the new growth that's going to happen, and so you have a dark night of the soul. And this is where I take in a lot of the neuroscience of automaticity and creating habits, is making your unconscious work for you. That's the moral formation, the inculcation of virtue. If you're not practicing virtue, you can't expect it to become part of who you are. A ubiquitous example in the literature is that of a snow hill, where if you're first starting out on a completely pristine slope, you can make whatever track you want. Spend all day sledding, you're going to have some deep grooves that you've already worn, and it's really hard not to fall into a pre-existing groove. And use that as an analogy of virtue formation or character formation in the brain. And so how one chooses to live life has a structural and functional effect on the brain. And a continued action creates automaticity in various decisions and actions. You can create your own determinism. That's a little bit of visual illustration of how this could end up working, but can also work in a positive way. The unconscious is often not fixed. It can be formed. Form it in the way you want at the outset, then it doesn't take conscious effort to do what you want it to do. Or, if it's already doing the bad things that you wish it wouldn't, then it takes time and emotional struggle, but even any effort of resistance helps in terms of the delinking and relinking. A lot of clients that we'd have would be on their 7th, 8th, 12th rehab program. They have become a connoisseur of fine rehab programs. But eventually one kind of sticks. Even that continued effort helps. Even if there's stumbles and failures. Or somewhat related, attention comes with training. What you notice depends upon what you've trained yourself in the past to notice. Relates to virtue. I talk about this in terms of, say, praise, hymn singing in church. When God says to praise God, it's not a narcissistic request by God to stroke a divine ego, but it's a way for memory and mind to develop the connections to the eternal, and to develop the ability to think that way. Transforming love. This was a presentation I did at Zygon. This is one way that, using Robert Russell's CMI, that I'm speaking back to science. There's a lot of studies on romantic love and parental love. And my critique is that the studies seem to suffer from a definitional problem. They just talk about love as if parental and romantic encompasses the whole thing. But then I draw from the resources of theology and the different kinds of love that you find within theology. Say, okay, let's broaden our definition of what love is. And if you look at the studies on romantic and parental love, talks about the different neurochemicals that are involved in love that help both loosen up and break neural connections in terms of unlearning and help consolidate new ones. So intense experiences of love can be neurally transforming. And often fairly quickly. Okay, that works romantically and parentally. Can we broaden our definition and see what can the love of God do? And what are the practical implications for both transformation, learning, and unlearning for someone within a religious context that develops a great love of God or a great love of others that don't fit the currently tested categories. And so it's to suggest and open up a research program into other definitions of love. So, little overview of some of the technical aspects, but then a step back into some of the practical application that gets me excited. Questions?
My colleagues are finding that a powerful way to get neurons to rewire is through video games. There's something when you get so engrossed, the whole rewiring is ever so much more efficacious. I'm wondering, has anybody tried spirituality?
Not that I've seen. And this is why I'm hoping to suggest and open up new research programs.
Yeah.
I know of the video game material. And
It's very hot for rewiring, but I have not heard in your domain of anybody doing that.
not as of yet that I know of. And the video game stuff, they're also doing good work on that in terms of recovery from different, like OCD or depression,
Yeah.
autism. It's an exciting area, but I haven't seen spirituality explored yet. Hopefully this means I can make myself a nice career.
Comments? You?
I just wonder who the agent is in the driver's seat that, for you, in your mind, as you think about this, that to get your subconscious, or your unconscious to work for you, or to rewire the brain. Who is the agent there, and how are they not already connected to that brain? Can they even make a clear choice?
Well, the dissertation itself looks at healthy brains. If you add addiction, then that adds other causal factors into the mix that makes research a little more problematic. There's good research on triggers and stuff in addiction, but I want to look at how a healthy brain learns and changes. And then you can extend those principles to ones that were inebriated. But in terms of, there's a lot in Wesley about divine grace. And so couching my whole dissertation would be, if you're looking at is it God or the human agent, in terms of who's in the driver's seat there, it involves a lot of exploration of grace, the types of grace, as well as divine action. That is probably one of the more difficult chapters of my dissertation. And so far I've been saving that for last.
Do you, in your dissertation, deal with cognitive versus affective?
Yes. My position is that there is no clear-cut distinction between rationality and emotion. In that, there's times where you can rationally override emotions, but then at a deeper level, they're still very mixed and impact each other. And so that is my position on that. I don't talk about a completely rational space or a completely emotional